I'll take the mic. Yeah, better?
Yeah. Sure.
So I'm really happy to see so many people here. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight, and I want to thank Jenny and Tony for being willing to, to host this particular topic. We talked about it last September, actually after a panel we had held on the Great Depression, and I said, let's choose a topic that is in the more recent history. And this is what I call, I love history, as I think many of you know. I'm a novelist, but I'm also a bit of a history nut. And I feel like living history has a dynamic quality to it. And what I mean by living history is that there are many people here tonight who have a really visceral and intact memory of what Westport was like before the state took the beach by eminent domain and built Route 88 and built the new bridge, and the old bridge came down. And they remember the point. And there are stories here. There are all stories that there are people here tonight, not just the panelists up here, but among you, that you have stories that are really part of that living history of the town. And I love that. And I was really excited to hold this particular conversation because I felt like we would get the chance to share those stories and to have a conversation and to hear opinions and feelings. And I also know that there's a lot of emotion around this particular event. And when I was doing research for my first 3 novels, which are all set in Westport, and for my first book, I did most of my research using written materials. But one of the pieces that I used that was really integral to me was the Westport Point Bridge, and also by Carmen Maiocco, and also Carmen's book on the history of Westport. And those books were really critical to me to understand the history of the town. I'm not from here. I came here when I was 2 for the first time. I was born in 1968, so I'm 47, so I don't remember the Point Bridge. And for me, though, when I did interviews with people who remembered that period of time, and I would ask, like, for you, as an older person, as an older Westporter, what's your sense of when, of the most critical event in the last 100 years of the history of the town? In the kind of memory and the stories that you've heard, and almost down to a person. Everyone said it was when the old bridge came down and the Route 88 was built. So I'm really inspired by the topic, and I'm really happy to be sharing it with all of you tonight and to be hearing your stories. So just a few opening remarks. A number of people here may have hearing difficulties, so I want to make sure that we speak one at a time. And also, if you have a question, down the road when we open up questions and comments from the audience, I just want to make sure that you speak as loudly as you can, and I'm going to repeat it back just so that everybody has a chance to, to hear. And also, I want to make sure that in this conversation we allow for and support a real range of voices. With a diverse range of perspectives and experience. So on that note, I also want to remind you that I'm one of those people who came in on that road. So I know there's a lot of stuff that came in on that road, and people like me are part of that. So I'm going to turn that over to Tony, and he'll give us a bit of a kind of overview.
Tony?
Thank you.
Can I make a suggestion?
What's that?
You got about 8 or 10 people on the stage. You could sit along the stage if that doesn't interrupt you people.
Fine with me. The stairs, anybody wants to come up the stairs, sit on the stage?
Sit on the stage.
I've got stage fright, I'm good.
You're in the right place then, right there. Anybody wants to come up, please do. The reason we don't have more chairs is that with a topic like that's really about highways and bridges, we thought everyone would think that it was a meeting of the highway department, and therefore they wouldn't come. So anyway, this is actually really about roads and bridges, highway department stuff. But these events in the 50s and early 60s are really critical, I think, to, as Dawn was saying, to shaping the town the way we experience it today. There's that road, Route 88, it's called the Horseneck Beach Access Road. We know it as 88. It runs about 11 miles, originally connecting Route 6 and the beach. And it was built, of course, because the state took over Horseneck Beach in 1956, which was just after Hurricane Carol of 1954. But it wasn't because of Hurricane Carol that the state took over the beach. The state had been eyeing the beach for a long time. In fact, the earliest record that I can see of it is from March of 1938. So before the 38 hurricane, before any of those three big mid-20th century hurricanes, the state had been angling for Horseneck Beach. But the three hurricanes, 38, 44, 54, did have an effect, of course, because it changed people's thinking. You've got this very popular beach, hard to maintain, gets damaged by hurricanes as well as just regular type of maintenance. And people start thinking about how expensive is it for the town to do that? Should the state do it? What's the infrastructure around that beach? And is the town going to pay for it? Should the state pay for it? It was a controversial subject, to be sure. One of the controversies that we'll be talking about. And the hurricanes definitely changed that thinking, but the hurricanes were not the reason for the state's interest in the beach. The new road, of course, had a new bridge, nice new modern bridge, which brought the question, what do you do with the old bridge? The old bridge, I know many of you looking out, many of you, of course, would remember it. It was built in 1894, I believe. That sound right, Carmen? It was an old wood and iron bridge, very old-fashioned bridge. It was a drawbridge, but it didn't open this way. It swung. It was a swing bridge, sort of like the Peyton-Arrow Bridge. And it went from just to the east of Lee's Wharf, across the river, to just to the east of where the back eddy is now. Of course, it wasn't the back eddy back then. It was a very popular bridge. As kids, we loved it because we could walk across the bridge to the beach. We fished off it. In fact, everybody fished off it. That was a very, very popular fishing bridge. But it was always in need of maintenance, and it simply couldn't take the amount of traffic that it had. That was the main road to the beach. People came down Sanford Road, and a little bit of 177 came down Main Road, all the way across that bridge. And on a summer weekend, you couldn't move at Westport Point. I've heard people say that the traffic was backed up to Cornell Road sometimes. It was really, really bad. People at the point could just simply couldn't get out of their driveways. In 1949, the town did a study, a count of traffic over the bridge. It was a 3-day study, presumably over a weekend, during the summer of '49, and the count of cars was, over that 3-day period, 18,000. It's astonishing. But they had huge crowds at the beach. The beach sometimes would be, they've estimated between 10 and 15,000 people at Horseneck Beach at various times. So it was simply inadequate for that kind of traffic, and the bridge was always in need of some sort of repair or replacement, which of course would be very expensive. Those in favor of saving the bridge, a lot of people wanted to save the bridge for nostalgia, for fishing, because it's the way it always had been, but also there were commercial interests there, because the point was a very commercial place back when the bridge was there. There were restaurants, there were shops, there was the Point Market, there were gas stations, there were little souvenir shops, there were just all kinds of things all along Main Road and on both sides of the bridge. A very active commercial area. And so one of the things that would happen if the bridge would go away is that commerce would dry up. And in fact, it did. So again, controversy over that, or winners and losers as far as that goes. There were people who preferred it that way, people who wanted a quiet little village. Others lamented the loss of the bridge and the loss of that activity that was down there. Route 88 itself was also controversial. It was 11 miles of highway that ran right down through the middle of town, and that was farm area, mostly farms. And some of those farms got split in two, much to disfavor of the farmers in an agricultural town. We'll hear more about that. It was controversial then, and it's still controversial now, and I know we'll hear more about that tonight. Many people, of course, like the road, the freedom of access that you had with this highway just shooting right up through town, especially in the early 60s when it linked with another new road, which was Route 195, which was new in the early 60s. So right now, it wasn't just getting into Westport more easily, you could get out of Westport more easily. You go to Fall River, New Bedford. If you felt really crazy, you could go all the way to Providence. Pretty good. And one last thing about the road, and that is, it was, for New England Road, it was unusually straight. So, I mean, there's some curves here, but it's a very, very straight road. And I can speak as a teenager at the time that had a driver's license. It was an invitation to speed. And people did speed. And they, of course, still do. But early on, there were some terrible accidents, lots of accidents, and some of them fatal. And it was just another case of a rural town like Westport getting used to, adjusting to their first high-speed highway. And it took some adjustment there, too. All these changes, these were 50, 60 years ago, a new highway, a state takeover of a popular beach, and the relationship between the state and the town, somewhat touchy at times, to be sure. The demolition of a well-loved bridge, and the transformation of Westport Point from a pretty vibrant commercial area into somewhat of a quiet backwater. These are all very important in shaping the Westport that we experience today. And I'm looking forward to hearing the stories that you all have to say about it. On to Carmen.
Okay, good to be here tonight with you. So I'm like Dawn, in that I'm a transplant to town. And I don't remember the bridge at all. When the bridge came down in 1963, I was a teenager in Philadelphia, and I knew nothing of the existence of the town of Westport. So, but like Dawn, I also love history. And sometime in the early 1990s, speaking with someone, I came to realize that there were some people in town who didn't know that there used to be this wooden drawbridge from the point over to the beach. So I thought, originally my idea was to try to talk to as many people as I could and write it all down and put it in the library. And that's pretty much what I did. Originally, I just typed it out on pieces of paper, but then people started to ask me, can I get a copy of it? So I went to a printer, had it printed up in this little book. I got most of my information from talking to people who actually remembered the bridge. There were many sources, but my best source was the gentleman that I called Old Man Al Lees. He was, the Al Lees of Lee's Supermarket, the founder of that enterprise. And he, at the time, he was in his 90s and very talkative and had lots of good memories of the bridge. He was the draw tender for the bridge for 30 years, from about 1930 to 1960. So just a little, I thought it might be helpful to do a quick time frame. So this bridge was built, this iron and wooden drawbridge that went from the point over to the beach, was built in 1894. Now before that, to get from the point over to the beach, usually there were there were enough fishermen around that they would row you across. You just engage someone to row you from the point over to the bridge. I don't know if they charged money or they just did it as a community service. I don't know, but you would row across.
They were Westporters. They charged you money.
But that's how you got across prior to the 1890s. We could go, I guess you could go all the way around over Hicks Bridge, because Hicks Bridge was there. And you could go down Horseneck Road and come around by East Beach and approach Horseneck Beach that way. But I think the most common way was to get rowed across, or maybe have your own boat. And then in the 1880s, early 1890s, the people who lived in the south end of town started to agitate for a bridge. They wanted an easier way to get across the river. So they started to promote that idea. Most of the people in town, this was 1890, 1891, were adamantly opposed to building this bridge. They didn't feel that it really would benefit them directly, that it would be too expensive, it was new. There was a lot of resistance. I've got some statistics in the book, but there were a number of town meetings in the early 1890s where the votes were overwhelmingly against the building of the bridge. I mean, one of the votes was something like 75-2. I mean, it was a real strong feeling that this bridge should not be built, that it would, I think part of it was the feeling that many people in town felt that it would only benefit the more wealthy people who were from New Bedford and Fall River, and they're the ones who wanted the bridge, and that sort of most of the people in town wouldn't really benefit from it. So there was a lot of opposition. Every time the idea of the bridge went to town meeting, it was overwhelmingly defeated. So the proponents of the bridge went over or around town meeting and went to the state legislature and had legislation passed that authorized the building of the bridge. And so that's how the bridge came about. The town did end up paying for most of the bridge, the cost. The total cost was something, this was 1893, 1894. The total cost of the bridge was about $20,000. And the people in Westport paid like $19,500. It's all of this is in the library. You can dig through the records and find all of this. But okay, so now we had this bridge going across the Westport River, and it was as Dawn said, it was a wooden, timber, and iron bridge. It was a drawbridge, but it didn't open like that. It rotated around a central point. So the way that they would open the bridge is there was a tool called a key. It was about this high, an iron device that fit in the middle of the draw part of the bridge, fit down over another metal part, and then there was like a 16-foot wooden pole. And a couple guys would get on one side, and a couple guys would get on the other side, and they'd walk around in a circle. And as they walked around in the circle, the bridge would turn and begin to pivot on itself, and it would open up a space for boats to go through. Now that there's some nice pictures of how they opened the bridge. Again, Al Lees Sr., the old man Al Lees, he said he didn't open the bridge that often. There wasn't that much need for people to go up into the East Branch. He said he would open it maybe, he always had to arrange with the draw tender, Al Lees. He would open it about 15 or 20 times a year. Sometimes a sailboat would want to go up. Occasionally, people would have other reasons to go up there, but it wasn't like they were opening it a lot. Staying with Al Lees here for a second, so we all know where Lee's Wharf is. I'm surprised not to see Albert Lees here tonight. We know about the Lee's Wharf. So a gentleman named Will Whalen, like around 1905, something like that. Remember, I wrote this book 25 years ago, so a lot of it, and it's not first-hand knowledge. So, but I believe Mr. Whalen started a small store at Lee's Wharf early in the 20th century, and he sold mostly goods to that small fishing community, because there was always a fishing fleet there, and to the point. So he had a small store all kinds of, gasoline was a big part of his trade, and gear for fishermen, and then just basic supplies for the people, the fishermen and the people who lived in the point. Well, around 1920, now Will Whalen was getting old, and Al Lees, the first one, he was 19 or 20 years old, and he came and started to work at the point at Will Whalen's store, and stayed there. In 1929. Al Lees bought the store from Will Whalen, and then Al Lees ran the store there at the point on Lees Wharf for 30 years, from about 1930 to 1960. Somewhere in there, I forget when, but somewhere in there he started Lee's Supermarket. But it really started down there at Lees Wharf. If Albert was here tonight, he could tell us, or maybe some of you remember, I think Al Lees had a little store first.
A hardware store.
Yeah, a hardware store, like where the Santos Farm is. So there was also, that was part of it, the Lees story of that business. So about, 1930 to 1960, Al Lees, old man Al Lees, ran the store and was a draw tender. And then by the 1950s, the strain on the bridge was just becoming really impossible. That bridge was built in the 1890s to carry horse-drawn wagons. And by 1950, there were thousands, tens of thousands of cars going over that bridge. Plus, it kept having to be repaired. I mean, there's a lot of data out there about how much money we put in. I mean, the people at Westport, folks at Westport, put into keeping that old wooden bridge going. And it was a lot of money. $40,000 here, $25,000 there. It was always getting damaged by storms, and it just. And by 1950, it just had become untenable. And the state had started to eye Horseneck Beach by the mid-1950s or so. The state had taken Horseneck Beach from the town, and for the use of all Massachusetts residents. And part of that taking was they were going to build this road, Route 88, and a new bridge. So in the new bridge was started something like 1961, or don't quote me on these, but around that period. And then there was a couple of years where both bridges stood side by side, the old bridge and the new bridge. Lots of controversy in town about what to do with the old bridge, as has been discussed. Eventually, the state really put the pressure on Westport and said, we, the state, will pay for the entire demolition of the old bridge. However, any part of the bridge that you in Westport decide to keep is yours. You'll be responsible for maintaining anything that's left. So if you don't demolish the whole thing, it's your baby. Well, when people in Westport heard that, they decided that the bridge has to go. Despite protests from fishermen and from the businessmen down there who were afraid that it was going to create a backwater down there. So the old bridge was knocked down. By 1963, it was gone. And there's still some remnants of it. If you want to go down there and take a look, I mean, there's some. I was just out. My wife and I were out on our boat today, and I took a ride by there to make sure. But there's still parts of the old bridge that's still there. There's like old rusting, iron. The underpinning of the bridge, that's still there on the point side. Then if you go over there to the back eddy side, there's also some understructure still there. Just because again, it's been a long time since I talked.
Then I'd love to shift for 1 second to, because you both will remember. So you'll remember the traffic, the bridge, I mean, my husband Steve has described to me just remembering when he was little, driving, laying down in the back seat of his parents' station wagon while they were going over the bridge, because we didn't have seatbelts then. But he was, and feeling the rumbling, of the, just how different it was, and the smell of creosote. But you also will remember, because I think we've talked about there's like a pea shooter story, right? Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
There's some stuff? Yeah? You got some stories? Yeah? Who's gonna start?
Go ahead.
Well, during my college years, I had to get some money for this. Quickest thing was work at the boatyard 5 days a week, and Al Lee's Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, it's fine.
You're speaking.
So every Saturday and Sunday, we'd work at Lee's Wharf. And every now and then, of course, Al would come over and say, "Come on, we got to open the bridge." And we'd go out there and lower the cranks and put the gates down. And each corner of the bridge had a jacking screw. And you'd have to go out and turn these screws, probably 25 or 30 turns, to get the screw to recess up into the drawer, so that the bridge could rotate. And there was one at each corner. Which, we only had one wrench. Cars were backing up, you could hear horns trying to get the bridge. And then, like you said, we had the big key in the middle that drove the pinion that worked around the main bull gear. And I don't know how many times we'd have to walk around that, but quite often we were, 15, 16, we weren't the most rugged team in the world. So it would take maybe 4 or 5 kids on each end of the crank. And probably 300-400 turns going around. And you tend to get a little dizzy if you went fast. You score as fast as you could because the horns kept blowing. And you had to go through the same operation in the opposite direction and close it. And then with the one wrench go around to the 4 corners and jack up the 4 corners. And the payment for that, Al would give us a coffee milk and a Reese's bar. And that was the payment. Of course, we're getting a regular hourly pay from him for the store, but the additional bonus was a coffee milk and a Reese's. And that's what I remember about cranking on the bridge.
Let's see, the pea shooters. Traffic was pretty heavy on Main Road. One story, Chape White was telling me, he's about 76, 77 now. Chape was telling me about a story one day where they kind of put a stick in a small boat, made it look like a sailboat, and they made them open the bridge on a Sunday, and they had the traffic backed up to Cornell Road. As far as the pea shooters go, the traffic was bumper to bumper all the way down Main Road from Cornell down, and probably back on Sanford Road too, but it would go slow. We'd get up in trees with pea shooters, and we'd take these television antenna, the old ones, we'd cut the ends off, and they were long, about 3-foot tubes, aluminum tubes, and you could take uncooked peas, and I mean, they were like blowguns. And there were a lot of convertibles around in the 50s. And we had a field day crossing the Point Cemetery. We'd lay up in the tree there in front of Bernadette Carter's house, and it'd be a couple of us up in the tree, and they'd be going slow, we'd zap them. They didn't have any clue where it was coming from. And they weren't going fast enough to hurt themselves, if you did get their attention. But yeah, there's a lot of funny stories about the bridge. Somebody's mentioned there was, maybe up to 100 people at night fishing on the bridge when the fishing was good, and they'd be shoulder to shoulder. And there was one guy who used to notch. The original bridge they built, I believe, had iron pipe railings, and they must have taken those down, because when I was a kid, they were like 4x6s or something like that for a cap rail, and it was wood. And this one guy down there, he used to notch it. If he caught a fish, he'd put a notch in it. So when he'd go down at night, he'd run his handle on the rail. If he hit a notch, he knew he'd got a fish there before. And but they would, on an outgoing tide, all these guys are fishing, and there's hooks and sinkers flying around. And then, of course, the locals, like Roger Hart, your nephew Russell, Roger and Chape and some of those guys, Reedy and a bunch of those guys, they get out there with their outboards and go along and he'd snag like about 20 or 30, 40 lines. You know, he twisted up. And, the guys fishing on the bridge would go berserk. And they stole Roger's motor one night. They got even with him. But anyway, there was a lot of funny things. Chape one time, I don't think a lot of people realize that they talked about the maintenance on the bridge. It was a wooden bridge, a wooden deck, and for a curbing, they had like a big beam, and it was wood. And when it rained, it got slippery, and Chape was going over it on ball tires or too fast or something. But he actually jumped over that and hit the railing. He almost put it over, and it was slippery when it got wet. Herb Hadfield, I don't know, some of you might know Herb. He was kind of a painter and a naturalist, not a house painter, but an artist. And Herbie used to jump off that bridge. I don't know if Howie remembers that.
That was a favorite fisherman.
Yeah, and go jumping off the bridge. So there's a bunch of other stories. I'm trying to think. One thing that went through my mind was I was thinking of Route 88. You're talking about it. And I don't know of another town that the whole state highway is in one town.
It's the longest stretch of road in Massachusetts, the longest state highway, all entirely contained within a single town.
Yeah, I think it's kind of unique. So anyway, I'll pass this back down and we'll move along. Rick had a question, Dawn. Rick, Tom?
Didn't they go into the back bar of the packer truck to drag a few of the boys off, turn that key once in a while through?
Oh, they might have. They might have. It was up to Al. He was the drug tender.
If you want to tell a story, that is one that I think you get away with today. A group of us would go down on Halloween, and of course that gives us license to do what we want on Halloween night. We used to buy cans of lighter fluid and would spray them across the bridge. And then when a car was coming, we'd reach up to the mats and light the lighter fluid to see if the cars would squeal their brakes. Because we were under the bridge in a boat, we could get away very quick. And I do remember, I had an old 39 Ford convertible. I was going across the bridge one night, and all of a sudden, we talk about potholes. A plank let go, and one of my rear tire went down into the hole and broke a rear spring. And Kilkey's father was very helpful, and he helped me repair it free of charge. But he said, the town should pay for that. So I went up to the town hall with Kilkey's father's bill, and sure enough, the town paid the bill for the repair of my spring. So things were a lot better in those days. I don't think.
Yeah, great.
So one of the things that people told me, staying with the fishing for a minute, is that one of the advantages of the Westport Point Bridge is that it was low. And that was very attractive to the fishermen, because if you caught a fish, you didn't have to haul it up like you see these people fishing off of the 88 bridge today. If you catch any substantial sized fish, it's hard to haul it up, but the advantage of the old bridge was that it was low enough that it was relatively easy to pull in a fish. And then two, because of the fishing, when the bridge would, the gears and the rollers underneath that were involved with the opening of the draw, there were lots of sinkers. The fishing gear would get stuck in those rollers, so that would be, someone would have to go, they couldn't get the bridge, it wouldn't turn because there were so many fishing lines and sinkers. That was a major problem with keeping the bridge operating.
A couple of things this reminded me of. You talked about Herb Hatfield jumping off the bridge. Barbara Chadwick, who said she couldn't be here tonight, but she was telling me some stories that she remembered. And she said that she remembered her jumping off the bridge, but you couldn't just jump off because there was an abutment there. So it was one of these real daredevil type jumps where you had to twist your body just the right way to get into the water. So I mean, she said she was scared every time he did it. So it wasn't just jumping off, it was risking his life every time he did it. One of the things I'm curious about, maybe someone in the audience will know, when when the old bridge went down, there were some offers to do, to either keep it or to keep parts of it. And Sheldon Judson, Norma's father, who owned the Moby Dick Wharf Restaurant, which is where the back eddy is now, offered the town. He said, "I'll give the town $1,000 if we can keep the 150 feet of the southern end." That was from the Moby Dick Restaurant heading across the river. And it actually went to town meeting, but was passed over. The issue was passed over. It was never voted, never went to a vote. I'm very curious about what happened. And at the same meeting, either Lee's Wharf by itself, or I had also heard Lee's Wharf along with Shorty Leach, who had a boat repair shop down there, and the people from the Point Market, the Raposa family, Millie Reese from Packagug, had all offered to keep the northern end of the bridge for docking purposes or whatever. That also went to town meeting, but neither of those were voted, never came to a vote, and of course neither one happened. The bridge was entirely shut down. There was one proposal to keep a footbridge, just to keep a footbridge across that, and that didn't go anywhere either. And I was curious about if anybody remembered, it's kind of the politics of it, why those things were somehow defeated, not at town meeting, but in some other way they were defeated. Anybody in the audience know something about that? No? Claude?
I really have a little bit of info. In the 70s, when the Miranda was tearing the bridge down, Mrs. Lees wanted to keep some of the pilings that abuts their property in the market. She ended up having to sue in order to keep some of those pilings. And the reason was that when the bridge was there were a lot of smaller boats that used to park in between those pilings that were protected. And she felt that she wanted to keep the privilege of using that area. So she did sue to keep some of the pilings, and you can see them here today.
Yeah, that's true. Some of them are still there. Anybody remember about the keeping big sections like Sheldon Judson's proposal? It just seems to have kind of course, Norma would know that this is the Saturday Road. No?
I don't know.
Okay, no.
I think, I do recall people saying to me that part of the objection to keeping any part of the bridge is that it created too many navigational potential hazards. That you couldn't have those two bridges so close to each other. That was an objection. That it just made that area more complicated than it needed to be for boating.
I have a little funny story. This is, I don't know how much of Class X history, but this is about the 88 itself. My grandfather had a 40-acre woodlot right in the middle where 88 goes right now. And over the years, I inherited the woodlot. And I kept getting the bill to pay the taxes on this woodlot, and I look at the acreage, and the acreage on my bill was a lot more than the acreage I thought I had. So I finally went to the town hall and got another lease, Carl at that time. And we started looking into it. And for about 9 years, I had been paying taxes on part of Route 88. I told him, well, that's okay, as long as you don't charge me snow plowing. But what we had to do, they would only give me the last 3 years of rebate. But at least I did get something out of it.
Question
Yeah.
about 88. Was it taken, with the land, agricultural land, was it taken by eminent domain, or was it purchased first by the town and then to the state?
I believe it was eminent domain.
They also took cemeteries.
Yeah. As Dottie?
If you look at the records, the takings were almost zero too. The value given to these farmers, in large part was farmland. It was almost nothing. It was a shame. And they had beautiful farms that were split in half or whatever, or end up with landlocked parcels they couldn't access. And that's why it's still controversial, right?
Yeah, cut Kirby Road right in half. Think if you lived on Kirby Road and you wanted to go to Drift Road. Right, Russell?
In the back, in the back.
Yeah, in the back.
My grandfather had land split from 88, and he said that they took enough for a 4-lane highway to go down.
I think it's 300 feet wide, most of it.
And then one other thing about the bridge was going under the bridge. First of all, if you had a boat with just a small windshield, you had to be really careful about the tide. And you also had to be careful when you went under because there were big spikes that came down underneath. And you could get your head scraped, and we did, if the tide was just wrong and you didn't suck it.
Jonathan?
Yeah, one thing, Richie, you were talking about the state of Massachusetts. This is the longest state road. The reasons for that, and I don't know who has looked into this, but Raytheon was part of the whole Cold War situation. And one of the reasons why there were 4 lanes in Route 88 is because that was designed to be an emergency landing strip for the bombs. And the state parking lot was designed to be an emergency strip for them to take if other places were knocked out. And that was all part of that, 1948, 1950 idea where Eisenhower was making it easier to move men and material along the country. That's why the state did that straight arrow deal all the way down to 88.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I think they'd have a hard time landing a plane the way the trees have grown in. One little story, I grew up as a kid down on the point, and I see a lot of point people here. I remember going down to Lee's Wharf, and the fishing boats would come in every day in the summertime, good weather, lobster boats, they'd unload swordfish and lobsters. And with the old bridge there and an incoming tide, back in the early 50s, there was a rock off Lee's. If you drew 6 feet of water and it was low tide, that could hang you up. And the incoming tide, and you had to swing back into Lee's Wharf, the clearance between the end of the wharf and the bridge was tight. And it was like, I wonder if he's going to make it. It was always those deals. But here you go.
I used to sail on a boat called the Amberjack, which had 6.5 feet, and we did hit that rock once in a while. I also can remember a lobster boat lost its power making a swing, and a little bit of excitement pulling that off the bridge. A couple of things we haven't mentioned yet. Sheldon Judson, in dealing with the bridge, and I don't know the politics of it, but the original deck, or the addition of the deck, the Moby Dick, was built from timbers that were salvaged from the bridge. And to this day, the bulkhead in front of Tripp's Boatyard is also timbers that were salvaged from the bridge when they tore the bridge down. I brought a couple of pieces up on the front here to show it. And anybody that's interested in timber, you'll see some of the closest grain structure in that timber. So that was really old, first growth timber that they built that bridge from. The smaller piece was from the planking. And the reason I brought the table, because the table itself is made from salvaged timber from the bridge. And it's, so the bridge still lives on here in Westport in various forms and shapes.
What kind of wood?
Most of that is fir. I'm sure there's some yellow pine in there too, but most of it I have is fir. One of the members here in town, Bob Baker, people remember Bob and Peter Baker, on the land that they have next to me down near the river is where all the timber ended up that nobody wanted. Bob was, anything that was free, he would get it. And it was probably piles down there 4 or 5 feet high. Most of that is gone now, but when I bought my property next door, I found out from the surveyor that the property that Bob had stored all that wood happened to be mine. Nothing ever happened to it. The trees took over and Mother Nature has most of the wood now.
Right there, yes?
I have a question now.
The low bridge, it was built basically before the automobile, so what was the width of that bridge? And during high tide, did that ever flood the whole bridge because of the tide height during storms and stuff?
I think it was 27, 28 feet wide. And the hurricane, 38 and the 54 hurricanes, 44, I'm sure got water up on the deck, but a normal high tide, you could still slide under there.
Lee's Wharf would sometimes, in a really bad storm, Lee's Wharf itself would flood. In fact, it still sometimes does up there. But the bridge was up higher than that, and so it didn't. And it was wide enough for two cars. I mean, nobody drove very fast over the bridge, but it was wide enough for for two normal-sized cars of the 1950s or 60s to get by.
Yep, in the back.
I'm just curious if anybody knows, when the state stepped in and took most of the beach, I'm assuming that's the same time they took Gooseberry Island, but they left, from the old shanties to that little cape that Mickey Maiocco owned. I'm just curious why, if anybody knows why those houses were left when they took things on both sides.
I can guess at that. Those houses that are there now would survive most of the hurricane impact. And the cottages, which we used to call the Cooper cottages, they were every which way in the sand dunes, and it was a good time to step in. I'm sure that, I don't know about the sale price, but things were in a pretty sad state of array, a lot of damage done. So I suspect they left those because they were still good, livable houses. The same way with the life-saving station. That stayed through the hurricane, but the state did take over that.
I have an answer to part of that about Gooseberry Neck. The way I heard it, and this is from, Richard Paul, who was a lawyer at the time, Dottie's uncle, was a classmate in law school with the lawyer for Governor Herter, who was the governor during this time, 54, 55, 56, Christian Herter. And the story that I heard was that the state had enough money to take West Beach and either East Beach or Gooseberry. And according to this story, Richard Paul said, take Gooseberry. And this is according to, and so it was at the same time. And so they were looking at all of that property in there, but mainly for cost reasons decided not to take all of it, but they did take Gooseberry and West Beach.
Yeah, one of the things, if you look at time here, and I think Dawn and I have talked about a little bit, when you get up around the end of the Korean War till when they tore the bridge down, you had the Eisenhower thing, Korean War was ended. There was quite a bit of investment in the point, and over Sheldon Judson over on the other side, there was a development over on the south side of the bridge. And then the hurricane gets thrown in there and things get mixed up. There was investment by the Reeses, the Leaches. Sheldon Judson saw an opportunity where he built a pier out where the state boat ramp is now. And he had skiffs built, and George Leach must have had 25, 30 skiffs there. And it was really booming. And then between the hurricanes and the state and everything, it just turned that whole thing upside down, cut people's farms in half, 88. But it was a double-edged sword. I look at the point, if the bridge was still there, I don't think you'd have a historic district. That all happened around 1970. And it's a double-edged sword, and it's how real estate prices have changed. And, who's the winner, who's the loser, I don't know, but the dynamics are kind of interesting if you really get digging into it.
One of the things I've often thought, and then I'll go to questions, is I've often said to myself, what would Horseneck Beach be if the state had not taken it? Well, would it be honky tonk? Would it be just a lot of, super wealthy You know, people who have, or what would it be? You know, what would it be? I don't know that, there's not an answer to that question, but, I think it's, it's a good question. So someone, yeah.
Mr. Macumber, maybe?
Did you keep?
Yeah. I have a little addition to the story. My father built an auto repair shop in 1925, same year I was born, at the corner of Hicks Bridge Road and Pine Hill Road. And it so happened that in the 20s, 30s, and I guess into the early 40s, Horseneck Road was the main route to Horseneck Beach. He was very successful by being open on Sundays, selling gasoline, and believe it or not, he liked to tell you how many tires he sold on a certain day. Tires back in the 20s and 30s weren't that great, and they just blew out, and he said he could hear them coming, thump, thump, thump. He sold tires. And that was the way they got to Horseneck Beach. And the main reason they didn't go through the point was the road system. You could go to Plant's Pavilion by going down Bridge Street, no problem. But if you wanted to go to Manchester's Midway, you had to go down John Reed Road all the way to East Beach Road, turn the corner at Alley's Restaurant, and come back on West Beach Road. And finally, the town built a road from John Reed Road over to Marguerite's Midway, and that helped some, but they didn't improve John Reed Road enough. I was a mail carrier in the middle 40s, and John Reed Road was part of my route. If you met another car on John Reed Road, you had to get off the blacktop, and so did the other person, because it was so narrow. Also, it had a terrific crown in the middle. You drove in the middle, because if you drove on the side, you would. So, it's already been said what happened when they got that all straightened out. They extended West Beach Road down to Bridge Street, and people had better means of getting to wherever they wanted to go to get to the beach. And therefore, the point was blocked with vehicles rather seriously on weekends. We used to do business with Lee's Walk, but we made sure we did it on Friday and Monday. Because if you drove in there, you couldn't get out again. Also, speaking of the bridge, the Coast Guard Reserve patrolled Horseneck Beach during the war. Every night there was 2 men on the beach. And the Coast Guard sent our food over from Castle Hill in a Jeep, and they pulled up on the bridge, and the railing at the top of the stairs that went into the top of Lee's Wharf was so close to the bridge they just passed the food across. But one thing that I'll never forget, one thing that came with every shipment, and this was supposed to be just for breakfast, was a gallon of prune juice. And most of it got dumped over the side. Sometimes a guy would force them into a smaller container and take it home. But I don't know what they were thinking of. And when it came time to remove the bridge, they were either cast steel or wrought iron I-beams holding up the bridge for pilots. And the contractor was able to get some out, but he couldn't get them all. And I had a welding business, and he hired me to go down there with my 400 amp welder, put it on the barge, and we go out, and Kenny Tripp dove down and cut those pylons off with my arc welder. It may sound peculiar, but it's easy when you have air pressure going down to make a bubble at the end of the rod. and you could cut those pilings off. During the '54 hurricane, my father and I and two other fellows were stuck in the sand dunes all through the storm, and we watched the boats go into that bridge, including our own, and just smashed to pieces. The current was so strong. And everything else has pretty well been said by the table up there.
Okay, I will, you had something you were gonna say or ask, Dottie?
Oh, yeah, just to, not to go off the bridge subject too much, but you had mentioned what would have happened if the highway hadn't been built and the state hadn't taken the beach. And I do remember when there were both bridges, and it was kind of an interesting time because I also remember before they opened the state beach what it was like with the state bridge. But I remember my uncle who was very much involved in the taking. However, he got into dealing with the state. And I have seen myself some of the plans for development of the area that's now the state beach. And I will tell you, there was a lot of plans for development with very, very tiny lots. They were never built. Would it have been like the Antasket Beach? I don't know, maybe, but it might have been. And I think looking back, I'm kind of glad they took it because it's beautiful the way it is. And once it's gone, you never get it back.
But to another kind of point, Claude, Claude, are you there? I know that you have done a fair amount of, research into, and you have a fair amount of knowledge. I remember you and I had conversations about farms that had been taken and culverts that had to be dug under the highway so that farmers could run their cows from one side of the highway to another. Can you just share briefly just a few things or a few anecdotes or a few pieces?
Yeah, I have some.
A few. I'm enjoying you.
I'll just give a quick summary of, you see, there's so many effects of the rooting game and the bridge were felt immediately, but they have spawned throughout the year a whole bunch of events that are been caused by that event, by the bridge happening way back. Let me just give you a little bit of an idea. There were about 40 farms and open lands that were broken up by the...
40 farms? I'm just going to repeat it. 40 farms?
Well, 40 farms and open lands
that were impacted by the taking of that strip of land down the center of
If you're
town.
interested in getting more built, if you go to the town GIS map and do a bunch of blowups for a whole line of 88, you'll be able to get a good count of how many and where these pieces of land were broken up. That completely destroyed the pastoral. You look at Westport and the feeling of Westport, it was 350-foot wide road going up the whole length of the town. Everything was affected. There were the transportation lines for farms and businesses, fraternal organizations, land use, machinery. But all these interactions were split, and that caused quite a bit of trouble. It made a lot of land available cheap for development, and actually, because of that, this land was available cheap, and we had a town government that was very amenable to development. We had our laws were almost non-existent. The planning board regulations were a little book, about 3 minutes and about an 8-inch stick. And board health laws were very lax. So the government took off, and that spawned a whole bunch of after effects. One interesting thing that I will mention, on Gifford Road there was a family farm, the Foster's, and very hard-working family, and 3 acres right through their land, as well as 7 or 8 others. There's something to the government spurred a whole lot of dramatic activity for quite a few years to upgrade our laws, and that's a story in itself. I'm giving you some subjects which are stories on their own standing.
And I'd love actually, if there's anyone here, because we've talked a lot about the beach and we've talked a lot about the point, if there's anyone else here who can talk to, who can speak to that question of how the farms and how the agricultural, this town as an agricultural town was impacted, either personal stories or, is there anyone else in addition who has any comments on that? Yeah?
Sure. My family owned a farm up on Gifford Road, and it was split when 88 went through. There was the Nicholson farm, and there was the Nicholson farm just south of that, and that was split. And I don't know what happened to the land on the west side of 88. I don't know who bought that, but when we bought up to 88. And another thing was that they took gravel out, and they took a tremendous amount of gravel out. The land, we had around 20 acres there, and the land had been 3 feet higher than anything around it, any of the land around it. And when they got through taking gravel, it was about 6 feet lower, and they didn't put much of any topsoil back. It took a long time for it to grow.
We talk about taking farm property. There's that stretch of 88 that I talked about that I was paying attention to. I can remember cutting hay and working with John Santos. And you take a, what'd you say, 35 feet wide roadway, or how? 300-foot cut right through the middle of the field. It's not worth cutting hay anymore. It kind of puts me in that place when I drive down there and look at the size of the trees that's grown in there from that time. But it did put a lot of the agriculture out of use.
Someone mentioned the tunnel. There is a tunnel under Route 88 that Claude showed me. I didn't know about this because of Claude. He can tell you more about it. Is it? I can't remember which farm it was, but sort of at the north end, there actually is a tunnel that was built at the insistence, apparently, of the owner that said, you split my fields, I got to get cars from one side to the other here. You're going to build a tunnel, and the state did. Claude, you want to?
The Goldstein, who I used to work for when I was 14, 15 years old, their land went way up past, on both sides of the river, so way up on the sloping hill, way up on the west side. They had the determination to fight the state on this, to get a truck on 88 so they could take, so their cows could go across to the other side of the land, which was the majority of their farm. And they were successful, but it cost them quite a bit of money. I don't know of anybody else that was able to get access across 88 except for those people. It's now kind of covered up, blown over, but it's still there.
Yeah.
And by the way, when they're not farm, the big still, there was in the paper the Menard Farm still is on that land. Follow the stream up, and you find the remnants of that still, giant place. The way that crossed, they used to dump the ash into the brook. We eventually ended up in the Westport River, because that's the most new dam set up. So that's how they got caught years ago. And there was a big stone crusher remnant on that farm also, which speaks to the days when you were building the road. They kind of crushed their stone more locally for transportation purposes. Another thing about 88 spawned a tremendous drainage problem, because it got through
Bridge.
88 also spawned a big drainage problem for Westport by cutting through swamps maple swamps, regular swamps, drainage brooks, the drainage effects of 88 are still being felt, and they were expensive. If you look at those maps, it's amazing, the thousands of acres that were affected by that.
I just want to know if there's anyone else in the audience who hasn't spoken who'd like to share or ask a question. Yes?
I have a question. I have heard that a family called Dexter owned a section of West Beach, and that they sold it or were forced to sell it to the state, but they kept the section for themselves, which eventually became Baker's Beach. Does anybody know anything about this?
Richie was, know about that.
I think my father and John Baker started the beach back in 1915, 1920. So I don't think,
That's true.
yeah. Just one comment while I'm here. I just want you to think about this. Can you visualize a 300-foot wide strip or a highway like 70, or like Route 88, stretching from 177 down through the middle of Tiverton, down through the middle of Little Compton, and ended up somewhere down around the Commons? Imagine if that would have happened today, because that's what happened in Westport when you really look at it.
Oh, yeah, yes.
I have a general comment. When I first moved to Westport, I started becoming very interested in history, and one of the things I looked at was, when things started to happen. And I realized that with the creation of Route 88, in order to service the beach, we opened this area to interests by lots of people. It used to be very hard to get through here, so traffic went across. And only once Route 88 was built and after the beach was taken, we started having legislative initiatives, which Claude has mentioned. I mean, we started with the first zoning regulations came in, the first conservation commission came in, the historic district commission came in 73. These were all responses to the pressures that were coming as a result of that road coming down through this town. So it is another positive and negative at the same time, because it is a negative in the sense that there were more pressures and therefore more need for regulation rather than letting it be a more gradual process. It was very quick.
I think we have time for,
Just a question?
Yeah.
I read on the Spinner website, I just happened to stumble upon some stuff about Gooseberry, talking about at the time when the state took it over, that there were, so many people still living there, that they had permanent cottages in addition to all the Quonset hut and all those type cottages that were still there, and that the state supposedly, the guy who was speaking to it was the grandson, and he was saying that they offered to relocate them to that area over by Bayside, those streets down there.
Small building, it's called small village.
Okay, and so I was wondering, I don't have any idea how many cottages or houses there were on Horseneck, what's now Horseneck to Cherry Web, that length. On that stretch, you've been alluding to it, that, it would have been more private residences or whatever. How many were there at the time, and did they move them or just kick them out?
You referring to Gooseberry Island?
Are you referring to Gooseberry or East Beach or West Beach?
Gooseberry
West
Island?
I think she's asking about West Beach.
Yeah, I'm asking about just the regular Horseneck West Beach, okay? At the time, did the hurricanes take all of them, or were there any privately owned properties too that did the state just take it or move them like they did to the Gooseberry?
Well, there is a development on Drift Road, basically across from where Kewkey lives, that a lot of the houses from that area were reestablished. And there's another one off of the upper end of Horseneck Road. The Lee's family, it's called, one of the Lee's wives, the name of the road, Shirley Avenue, Shirley Street. And there's houses down there that came from Horseneck and goes by the Bayside. So a lot of those houses were relocated. And the ones on Gooseberry were rather small. I can't say where they went, but they were pretty much all of them were moved off of Gooseberry. There were probably 15 or 20 small cottages over on Gooseberry, plus a large bar room. You can still see the steps in some of the foundations that are still there.
Were they moved privately, or did the state move in for the people?
I think they were, I can't answer that truthfully. I think it was a fellow named White, Jim White, moved it, an awful lot of them. And I think he got paid by the owners of the houses. I don't think the state paid him, but I can't swear to that.
Yes.
Tony, you alluded earlier to Gooseberry and the state, but the federal government must have owned part of that because they had the watchtowers there for World War II. How did that interact with the state taking property?
I don't think the government owned all of Gooseberry. I think it was just sort of down the end where those sort of fake farmhouses that were really towers were. Well, those towers at one point had farmhouses, farm structures built around them to make them, to camouflage them.
Oh, yeah, because but they must have been housing for the people who were stationed.
As well, that's right.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was they didn't own all of it. So much of that was private. Much of Gooseberry was private at the time that it was taken over.
So do you want to speak to the federal government own any of that now?
Does who? The federal government?
Yeah.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
In answer to the question about the cottages at the end of Horseneck, there were about a dozen, 8 to 12 cottages there had been for a couple of generations. My great-grandparents owned one, and my grandparents owned one, and they had friends that had been there for about 3 generations. And then when the Hurricane of '38 came, it wiped out almost all of the cottages that were on the beach there. One of the cottages, the one my grandparents owned, floated up into the sand dunes and was wedged between 2 of the sand dunes. And when they opened it up, the plates were still on the shelves. But they had to take everything out, and they used a turnstile and a horse, and they dragged it back on sleds back onto the beach, and they did sell it. But that was just before, well, that was in the 30s. And then when 54 came, it wiped the rest of the little ones off. So by the time the state took the beach, the little ones weren't there, but the big solid houses that are still down there made it through. So that's...
Since we're talking, we're a history group, kind of Westport history, I think something we're overlooking. You talked about the pressures on Horseneck Beach to use as a entertainment center. There was the one time proposed to put a railroad down to Horseneck Beach. I still have some certificates in that. But I knew a fellow by the name of Delno. He had a saltwater taffy place over on Gooseberry, and he also assembled a Ferris wheel to start a park of his own to see if he could develop that kind of an enterprise on Horseneck. And he was one of the promoters for the Horseneck Railroad. And call it railroad, I think it really was more an extension of the trolley car system that used to go into New Bedford, because at the end of each trolley car track, one Mattapoisett and South End New Bedford, and which would be Lincoln Park, they all had amusement parks to develop business for the trolley cars. And he wanted to set a trolley car, I think, but he called it a railroad, from the Lincoln Park track down to Horseneck Beach. And when I was a youngster, I remember there was a big pile of railroad ties, and also there was quite a lengthy railroad bed laid out. We used to pedal our bike up and down. So it really started, but whether it was for honest, or he just tried to make a few bucks and sell some stock? I'll leave that up to you, because it never developed, but the fella had sort of a questionable reputation, because they thought he was selling stock or on a phony indication that he knew it would never happen. But he used to have the saltwater taffy store on the main pier on Block Island. And he finished off his life. He was 90 odd when I was over there the last time, saw him, and we bought taffy from him. And I had a long chat with him about the railroad. But you don't hear too much of that in the Westport history. But it did happen.
Great, I think we're going to wrap things up now. It's about 8:30. And I just want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to thank our panelists. And thanks very much to Tony and to Jenny for organizing this.